set a goal for myself to live to be 122. And I picked the number because it's big enough that it feels like a stretch, it feels like a challenge, but it's small enough that I feel like it's very realistic. I really feel like I can get there, and I like to set myself up for wins. So let's see how I do. I think the real question, the bigger challenge that I feel, and I mean this honestly, is can I get to 122 with all my faculties in order? That seems like the much bigger challenge at this point. I have 3 children. I'm almost certain all of them, based on the breakthroughs in medical science, I think all of them will make it to over 100 years of age. And what that means is there's a big shift in perspectives that all of us need to make in how we think about aging, how we treat aging, and how we treat our bodies and our brains as we go through life. You know, if you look down at your sneakers, I'm looking at mine right now, I'm hoping they last for another 3 months. But if I needed them, if I was expecting them to last for another 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 decades, I'd have to do things really differently. So when I look at my hair, when I look at my skin, my teeth, when I think about my mental capacity, my brain, my cognition, I'm thinking about things with that number in mind and thinking, what can I really do to maximize not just my lifespan, but my health span? How can I live a life that's long, but also young in terms of how I can behave? And that's a big challenge. And that's something that I've been thinking about lately. My guest on this week's show is David Sinclair, Harvard Medical School researcher. Does a lot of work with genetics and the epigenome. If you think of his analogy, which I really like, which you'll hear in the show, is that genetics, which let's say is about 20%, right? This piano that's out in front of you, and then epigenetics, the stuff that you and your environment and how you live your life influences, that's the pianist, right? So you have the genetic blueprint, 20% is kind of predetermined, it's fate. And then the pianist sits down to play, and that's you and your environment and your job and the food you eat and the exercise and the thoughts you put in your brain, and maybe you can learn to play a concerto, right? And so that's kind of what we're looking at. And the anti-aging idea is that you can learn to play a song as an old man that you could play as a young man if you know what you're doing. A lot of the things that come up on this show are recurring themes: controlling your blood sugar, intermittent fasting, resveratrol, metformin, NAD, hormesis. A lot of these are coming up in a much more medical and well-researched way. I'd encourage you to get David's book and dig in deep. Really valuable for anyone interested in not just longevity, but health span. If you're new here, it's Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm a yoga teacher and a trainer, a serial entrepreneur, and a father. I do this show basically to learn new things. I go out and find health and wellness experts, yoga, biomechanics, movement experts, and I bring their best research to you. And the goal is really that we'll get actionable information so we can all live a more fulfilled life. As you're listening, if you have questions, comments, feedback, send me a voicemail, yogabody.com/Ask Lucas. And if you like the show, the best way to support me is simply to share the show on social and let me know you did it. Tag me at Lucas Rockwood. Thanks so much. Enjoy. So hello and welcome everyone. This week's show is called How to Live Forever. I'm here with David Sinclair, PH.D. David's a professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for Biological Mechanisms of Aging. He's best known for his work on understanding why we age and how to slow its effects, which I'm guessing everyone listening will be interested in. He's got a new book out. It's called Lifespan, and it is available on Amazon and also at his website, lifespanbook.com. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lucas. Thanks for having me on.
You know, there's the superficial or kind of the pop health version of aging is when you look in the mirror and your skin is wrinkly and you got age spots and your back is a little hunched over. And that's certainly part of the deal. But I always like to start off the shows with definitions from your perspective in terms of genetics and looking deeper than the skin. How do you define aging, and kind of from a clinical perspective, what is aging?
Right. Well, there are a few different ways to look at aging. I'm a biologist, a molecular biologist, geneticist. From a biological standpoint, aging is just simply our bodies losing youthful information over time. And all cells do this. It's generally unavoidable. You can speed it up and slow it down with various ways to live your life. But yeah, we think now that information that is laid down when we're very young, not the genetic information, but what we call epigenetic information, the program that runs the machine, is lost over time. So that's the biological definition. And by that definition, aging happens to all cells all the time. And just when you look in the mirror, it's a good indicator of what's happening to the rest of your organs as well. A more interesting definition actually is what doctors, the medical profession defines aging as. And they have historically, at least for the last 200 years, regarded aging as something different from disease. And we take this for granted. Everyone goes, oh yeah, aging isn't a disease. But if you look at the actual definition, aging results in what we know that aging results in decline in function and decline in health, eventually leading to death. But it happens to more than 50% of us. And that's the only reason we don't call it a disease. By every other measure, it's actually a disease that just happens to affect a lot of us. And so I make an argument in my book that that's just the wrong way of thinking about medicine, and focusing on diseases one at a time and whacking them on the head like a whack-a-mole game. That actually just leads to us going back and forth in and out of doctors' offices and surgeries, whereas if we could keep the information in our bodies from being lost, or at least slow it down, we could be not just healthier for longer, but all the diseases of aging would also be pushed off into the future.
And when you say keep the information from getting lost, that's the epigenetic information, is that correct?
Right. So if you're not a biologist, the best way to think of it is the genome is like a giant piano with thousands of keys, and the epigenome is the pianist. And she's great at playing a concerto or a jazz tune when she's young, but over time she loses her vision and can't play the right notes. And eventually it's such a bad piece of music you can't listen to it. And that's how our cells feel as they get older.
This anti-aging community and quantified self movement, it's probably never been bigger. And a lot of people, biohackers online and stuff, they claim that their biological age is 20 years younger than their real age. And from your perspective, from university perspective, is there actually things that you can measure? Like, could you take a random person off the street and look at whether it's their genome or their blood tests or endocrine markers? Are there things that can really do that accurately, or are these kind of like online quizzes and things that don't really give you an accurate picture?
We're getting a lot better at it. There's a telomere test, which is somewhat accurate, but not as good as the new ones. There are blood tests, and I've invested in a company called Untitled Chapter that does this. There's a few others that you can have a look at, some markers that change over time. But telomeres and these blood markers, they can vary depending on a bunch of things that may not have anything to do with aging. And so a real breakthrough came in the academic world about 10 years ago, and now just verging on being commercialized for the public, is the ability to measure the epigenetic clock, to really reach in and read the pianist's age in the body. And essentially it's just you're reading methyl groups on the letter C in our genome. And we have thousands and thousands of these chemical modifications to our DNA as we get older. There are only certain ones that we need to look at to determine within less than 5% error somebody's actual biological age and even predict when they're going to die.
So in other words, without visually seeing someone, you could potentially take a DNA sample and you could get within 5%, you could pin them at age 63 or whatever it is.
Yeah, quite easily. We do this all the time for mice in the lab where we're reversing aging and promoting it. It's such a good predictor that a professor in my department is determining the age of bones from ancient humans that he dug up in caves.
But if there's variability, if someone can have the body and brain of someone much younger than their biological age, how would that track with an anonymous sample, or is there actually not that much variability?
Well, it's all going to go up. I think that my colleague is trying to figure out if this person was 40 or 20. That's probably, but you can alter the trajectory. So we now know from work by Stephen Horvath and other professors that if you look at people who take care of their body in ways that we're increasingly learning how to do versus someone who smokes and doesn't exercise, that clock will be changing at a different rate. And what's great about it, besides it being a nifty parlor trick or something that we can learn about our current biological age, it allows us researchers to very quickly determine, or at least ostensibly determine, we think it works, to be able to test interventions. So how do you know if X is working or Y treatment does anything? You don't want to wait 50 years for the outcome, which is how we used to have to do things. Now we can go pretty quickly in our research. And also in the lab, we work on mice to try and slow their aging, and we no longer have to wait 3 years for them all to die.
So there's the typical thing in health communities or anti-aging communities, and people say, wow, you look 10 years younger. And I've never really seen anybody who looks 10 years younger. I've definitely seen people who look 3 or 4, maybe 5 years younger, maybe like on the right light and a good day with a good night of sleep, maybe 7 years younger. But a lot of people just look well taken care of, so somebody who's taking care of their skin and somebody who's dressed nicely. But, 10 years, I've never seen somebody who legitimately looks 10 years younger, especially, well, let's say middle age and beyond. Like there's somebody who's 30 who might look 20, but I've never met anybody who's 60 who looks honestly 50. If I'm being honest, they look great and compared to their peers, but they don't look 50. What is the variability in terms of, what kind of spread you think people can really reverse aging or stop aging as you've suggested?
Well, you're judging them based on their skin pretty much, and the skin is exposed to the outside world, and so it's harder to keep your skin looking young.
That's a great point.
But it's actually pretty easy in our lab, and I believe in our bodies to keep our internal organs younger than our skin, and we know that people live up to 40, 50 years longer than others, and their rate of aging is slower. So it's doable. Part of it's genetic. About 20% is calculated to be genetically determined. But the good news for all of us is that means 80% is in our hands and how we live our lives. Now, I think 10 years is externally difficult, but internally it's definitely not. And those people who've looked after themselves should have organs that are at least 10 years younger than people who haven't. So
if you took two 80-year-olds, one of them could literally have the liver or the pancreas of a 60-year-old or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. My father's 80 and running around like he's 30. Doesn't have the body of an 80-year-old, a typical 80-year-old. He's got no aches, no pains, never gets sick, and perfect mental health and perfect outlook on life. He started a new career. I haven't looked at his organs, of course, but I bet if we did, they wouldn't look 80. When
you use these things, I guess, the quintessential pop health ideal is this six-pack chiseled person or these Instagram memes of health. When those people come into the lab, they very rarely are, I guess the longevity studies and looking at blue zones and things like that, these people typically aren't the Ironman triathletes and they aren't, fitness celebrities and things like that. So how do these stereotypical ideas of health correspond and then clash with what you actually see in a lab in terms of what's actually predictive?
Well, they're generally consistent. These blue zones are taking an average age, and there are outliers, of course. There are people that can smoke till they're 100 and still live a long life. They're the lucky ones. It doesn't mean that we can smoke and expect to live to 100, of course. That's silly. That said, these blue zones, and the one that I really like, because I've looked into it and I've tried that lifestyle, or at least that food, are the Okinawans. And they have, on average, longer life, but they also have outliers, that families that live over 100. They typically eat less. They finish a meal about 70% full. They are always physical. They're working hard. They eat the kind of foods that we can talk about, but I talk about in my book about what we think stimulates the body's defenses against aging. So not a huge amount of meat every day and not high glycemic foods, fair amount of plant-based foods. These things we do. Many athletes are not overeating. And for the general populace that, in our society that wants to live longer, we think that what those people have done naturally in their society is also very good for us. Now, I think your question also was, if you're, a triathlete, are you going to live longer? I don't think that that's the path to living longer. I think it's all in moderation, and you do have to move. You do have to lose your breath a few times a week to be optimal. But yeah, pounding your body and lifting massive weights to become bulked up, that's not a path to longevity. That's vanity, and we all succumb to that. But here's where it gets complicated, where you need to pulse things. So you can do exercise, but you also don't want to trick your body into thinking that it should put all its effort into building new muscle, because then it won't use its resources to protecting the rest of the body.
All the research that people have different opinions about longevity and supplements and prescription drugs and not. But the one thing everyone seems to agree on is that calorie restriction, at least in a laboratory setting, seems to be the strongest predictor of longevity. But all of that's always been in mice studies and things like that. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? And does that really have is that even practical? Because the idea of eating, finishing dinner 70% full sounds great. I don't even know, how do you quantify that? What is 70% full and what is calorie restriction? Do I undereat by 30% and 30% of who's? It becomes a fun fact, but I don't know really what to do with it. So how do you think about the calorie restriction research?
Right. So I've got a whole chapter on this, and the summary is that after reading about 10,000 scientific papers on this and researching it my whole career, last 25 years of it, I've come to the conclusion that the best thing anyone can do for their future longevity and health is to eat less often. That's not starvation or malnutrition, of course, but skipping meals is the best thing we can do. I really don't know where the nutritionist got the idea that 3 square meals and snacks in between was the right thing to do. I think that's caused a lot of premature deaths across the planet. And a lot of people are following the new advice, which is you only need 2 or even just 1 meal a day. And we do need a period of hunger for our bodies to literally turn on genes that protect our body against diseases and of aging. And if we're always full, or at least satisfied, and if we're not stressing our bodies biologically, putting them in a perceived state of adversity, those genes will be complacent. They'll come on a little bit, not enough to protect you from aging. And so that's the moral of the story of my research the last 25 years. It's being hungry, doing the exercise, doing some other things, gets these self-defense genes in the body to be hyperactive. And that, in the long run, will, I think, give almost everybody a longer life.
Those 2 things that you've just talked about earlier, you touched on being out of breath, and the second one being hungry. Most listeners for sure in the past week haven't been out of breath and haven't actually felt hunger. I always say that people haven't felt much of anything. They haven't felt cold. They haven't felt, they haven't felt hungry. They haven't felt out of breath. And sometimes it just feels like this masochistic thing, but when you go to the gym, I don't see even a lot of people sweating, and I certainly don't see a lot of people out of breath. It's not the most glamorous state to be in, but can you talk a little, most people, what I'm saying by that is most people moderate their exercise to the point where it's leisurely and they could have a conversation. Can you talk about the hormetic effects of being out of breath, of being hungry, and why people should think about integrating that into their day, if not at least their week?
Yeah, I find it difficult too. It's not easy. Your body doesn't want to be out of breath. Your body doesn't want to be hungry. We're primed to try and overcome those things. Our mental state is happiest when we've eaten a nice big meal and we're sitting around watching a movie, or typically, not everybody. So I totally feel for people who haven't been doing this. But it's necessary. If you want to avoid early illness and nursing homes in your 70s and 80s, you definitely have to do something. So get off the chair. I've gotten a standing desk, which has made a big difference to how I feel. I go to the gym for a few hours a week with my son, which has been fantastic. I lift weights to make sure I don't lose my muscle mass as I get older. I'm now 50. I stretch a lot because, of course, that's important as you get older. I don't want to fall over and break anything or rip anything. And then I run on a treadmill. I really hate being out of breath, but I have to do it. And actually just doing a little bit of boxing with my son is helpful. So that's what I do. I also go in the sauna and then I jump in a cold pool and I alternate that, because that's also, I believe, some way to activate these longevity genes. because the body's thinking that times are going to be tough. It has to hunker down. That's what I do. There's variations on the theme. You can run a lot further than that if you want. I generally only run for about 20 minutes on the weekend. I should do more than that. But the good news is that you don't need to do a lot to get a big benefit. Cyclists and runners, if they do a fair amount, I forget the number of how many miles they do, but you can have actually protection of a 30 to 40% reduction in your chance of a heart attack by doing fairly low amounts of exercise as well. The number that I refer to in the book is just 10 minutes a few times a week of running. But you need to get out of your breath. Like you say, you can't just leisurely walk or jog to really get the full benefits. You need to be able to get to a point where you cannot carry out a conversation because you're panting.
And what are the effects of that? I mean, specifically, how does that affect the body?
Well, okay, so this is what I've spent my career working on, so I could go on and on. But the big concept is that we discovered that there are genes that extend lifespan. We call these things longevity genes. And they fall into three main camps. The ones that we work on are called sirtuins. They're one of the main three groups. There are others that sense energy in the body. AMP kinase, that's called AMPK. And then there's a third one called mTOR, TOR. And they all sense adversity. mTOR is sensing a lack of amino acids in the body. But let me tell you about sirtuins for a minute, because this is what I have worked on, and I think they're crucial for this point. So sirtuins, there are 7 of them in each of our cells, and they can sense whether you're out of breath. They can sense whether you've eaten a lot of food, and if you're hungry and you've exercised, they will actually be turned on. Many of them, and they're in all parts of the body. And we've learned through mouse experiments, through human genetics, and a few clinical trials that these genes are protective against diseases and of aging itself. They do a lot of things that there's no easy answer of what do they do. I mean, what are the big things they do is preserve epigenetic information. The SIR in the sirtuin name is an acronym for Silent Information Regulator, which is their main job is really controlling genes and making sure that pianist in the cells is still active for longer. But they do other things. They go inside mitochondria and help keep the energy of the body up. They repair broken DNA. They make sure telomeres are not eroding quickly, which is one of the hallmarks of aging. And speaking of hallmarks, there are about 7 or 8 hallmarks that scientists agree on that are driving aging. But what I have put forth in my book is that I think that those 7 hallmarks, how many you want to call it, hallmarks, are not all primary. And I think that the loss of epigenetic information is upstream of many, if not all of them. And some of the evidence we have in my lab is that if we alter the epigenome and accelerate that DNA methylation clock, we get all these other things happening: mitochondrial dysfunctions, loss of stem cells, senescent cells, the zombie cells that accumulate. So I really think that if we can slow down the loss of epigenetic information, we'll have a much better chance of stopping all of these other hallmarks / causes of aging. One last thing I should say, because listeners may be very interested in this molecule called NAD. It's gotten a lot of press. We've been working on NAD for the last 20 years, and it's hitting the stream in a big way now. What NAD is, it's a chemical that's in our bodies that we need every day for chemical reaction, but it up and down with the day and with what you eat and when you exercise. And that NAD molecule is what sirtuins use as fuel. So these sirtuin protective genes in the body, they make enzymes, and those enzymes are the workhorses of the cell. But they don't work if you don't have high levels of NAD. And you can keep your levels higher by exercising and being hungry once in a while. But over time, we think in much of our body, the levels of NAD go down. And it's even worse if you're obese and you don't exercise and you're always full. So that it in the nutshell. And so what I've been testing in mice and now in people are molecules that raise NAD levels back up to youthful levels and simulating the effects of exercise and being hungry.
So you have people doing lifestyle stuff like exercising to the point of breathlessness, like skipping meals, feeling hunger, and then you're using things like NAD, I assume in a supplemental form, resveratrol, metformin, these kinds of things. So it's kind of a combination of lifestyle and then better living through science. Is that your approach?
Yeah, it is. I am often asked, can I just sit on a couch and pop resveratrol, metformin, and NAD boosters? You can. I'm not going to stop you. Everyone to themselves. But what the data says from our work is if you combine them, and I haven't done all combinations, that's quite a difficult thing to do rigorously. But we have done, for example, NAD booster and exercise, and the combination was even better. So they added up to something more. The same with resveratrol and intermittent fasting. We found that resveratrol works on top of intermittent fasting to the longest lived group of mice in that whole experiment. So yeah, I don't think it's an excuse to just pop a pill and you don't need to exercise anymore by any means.
On the topic of metformin, obviously a diabetic drug that people are using for longevity, but for people, I don't know of people using it prophylactically, but when people are using it, I'm just curious, does it encourage bad behavior because it helps people moderate blood sugar? Does it encourage people to be a little less strict and a little more loose with their carbohydrate intake?
I haven't found that to be the case. I think psychologically, people who are taking a pill for their blood sugar are much more aware of their body and their fallibility than others who are not. Similar to, if we found a cure for lung cancer, I don't think everyone would start going out and smoking either. There's a certain population who doesn't care about their health, no matter what you tell them. And then there's those who are really focused on maximizing their health in their life.
And for somebody listening who wants to learn more about metformin and resveratrol and NAD, probably not the best idea just to order from some weird pharmacy in India or something like that. Where would they turn to? Like, is someone like you available? Is it a functional medicine doctor? Is it all kind of gray market, or how does that look?
Well, I have to stay above the fray. I don't sell any supplements. I don't recommend any. I just have to do that. I hope listeners can understand it. That I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School with a top-notch scientific reputation. The moment I descend into the world of supplements, then you can't trust what I'm saying. But here's what I say in my book, and there's a lot of information on page 303 if folks would like to skip to the summary. But the bottom line is, so supplements, you're right, you can't trust them all, but there are some reputable companies. There are big companies. There's one I won't name, but there are some that you can look at. These aren't fly-by-night companies. They also they should supply their clinical data. So if they've had their product tested, you should be able to see the analytical report. You can even write to the company and say, show me that this is what it is. And if they don't write back, you know that that's suspicious. And there's what's called GMP, at least in the United States. It's good manufacturing practices, which is a way of saying that they are using the best quality machinery and monitoring to be able to make sure the product is what it is. Resveratrol generally is pretty cheap, so people aren't trying to get away with selling something else. High quality and high percentage material is what I would look for. I have resveratrol left over from clinical trials, so I haven't kept up with companies, but when I ordered resveratrol online, it was what it said it was. There's trans resveratrol. Look for that because the cis form of resveratrol, CIS, doesn't activate the sirtuin enzyme. It has to be the trans. So look for that as well. But try to get 98% pure or greater. Don't go for the 50% because this other 50% can cause diarrhea, and who knows what's in it. But just as a disclaimer, I never recommend anything. I'm not saying this is going to make you live longer or anything. But I do feel that I have a duty to tell the public what I've learned and what I do in full transparency. And honestly, most of my research is paid for by the U.S. public. So unlike most scientists who think that it's a sin to talk to the public, I've made it a goal of mine to be an educator as well.
And what about something like metformin? People could get in trouble kind of self-dosing with that, right?
Well, I think that because it's a drug and it's a fairly potent one on your body, you should do it under advisement of a doctor. And that's what I do. I have physician colleagues that I ask, and I have good feedback about what the dose should be. And it's different for everybody. You may not be diabetic, but you might have a family history. You might be sensitive to the drug. It can have some side effects such as upset stomach, and in rare cases, it can really damage your body. So, yeah, this isn't a drug to play with, but it is on the scale of drugs a very safe drug. The World Health Organization has it on a list of essential medicines for humanity, and in many countries, not English speaking, but non-English speaking, you can get Metformin just over the counter at a pharmacy.
David, I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate your work. I know a bunch of people will want to pick up your book right away and follow you online. Tell people where they should go.
The website is called lifespanbook.com, and there's a newsletter you can sign up for on the bottom of the first page. There's a lot of information that I put on the website, but the book is jam-packed with everything that I've learned over the last 25 years about aging and longevity, and a view into the future of where we're about to head with all of this new science. And we've actually just figured out that we can reverse the epigenetic clock, and we're going to be, last night I was actually at a meeting till 9 p.m. working out how we're going to be treating patients with a gene therapy that will, we think, literally reverse the clock of aging. So those people who you say you've never seen someone who looks 10 years younger, we at least think we have an idea how to achieve that. We're not going to be treating people for aging initially. It's not yet a disease, but we're going to be treating eye conditions. But it's an exciting future, and that's a future I paint in my book, and what it was like to make these discoveries just as recently as a year ago.
If you've heard about our yoga trapeze teacher training course that we've been now hosting in 5 different countries and of course in our home base in Barcelona, but you've been unable to come join us, I'm excited to announce our first ever online version of the course. We're doing an academic version with at-home study, at-home practice, with an option to join us in the future if you'd like. But if you can't join us in the future, or if you'd just like to do the at-home version, we're really excited. We've got a great group of people already joined the course, and it kicks off very, very soon here. To learn about how the course works and for full information, go to yogateacherscollege.com, and on the top navigation you'll see trainings, and click on calendar and you'll see a link to the course there. It's our online yoga trapeze teacher training course. It's a 25-hour Yoga Alliance continuing education course. We're super excited. The course starts in just a couple of days, and so check it out. If you have questions, feel free to get in touch. I hope you can join us. This week's tip is in response to a listener question. Listener Henry says, Lucas, I've been really getting into mushrooms in cooking lately, specifically white button mushrooms and shiitake mushrooms. Are they actually good for you? I assume everything in the grocery store is pretty blah, but I'm curious. So interestingly, if you go to the grocery store, you're right, there's a lot of boring foods there that aren't so nutritionally interesting. But of all the foods you can buy in the fresh section, one of the more common, more accessible, more affordable superfoods are mushrooms of all types, even a white button mushroom. Let's talk about shiitake mushrooms specifically. Shiitake, maitake, white button mushrooms. There's lots of common ones. Shiitakes are some of the most common, and people assume that common foods are not very nutrient dense. And for the most part, you would be correct. Things like rice and wheat and milk and egg, they're pretty blah foods. But in terms of nutritional density, let's just talk about micronutrient density. Shiitake mushrooms, and all mushrooms in general, are pretty amazing, actually. And so what do mushrooms have? Well, they have a whole bunch of vitamins and specifically minerals that are a little bit challenging to get in other places. Things like copper, things like selenium, manganese, zinc. They have B vitamins, even sometimes vitamin D. It's a different form of vitamin D, but it can be a good one. And they have some really interesting compounds in them that are not really found in other things, specifically beta-glucans. And it's a specific type of fiber that's been associated with cardiovascular health. It's been associated with, leveling off your cholesterol levels and a bunch of other things. They tend to be anti-inflammatory. And it's really interesting because it's essentially medicine. And these shiitake mushrooms, they're primarily cultivated in Japan, as the name would suggest, but they're grown in other places as well. China's a huge producer of mushrooms worldwide, and the US grows them as well. But in terms of their health benefits, really, mushrooms, even these like really common mushrooms that you'll find in a grocery store, are really like food is medicine, and these are literally medicine, and they've even been used in clinical trials where people are given just a couple of dried shiitake mushrooms a day, and they're so potent that it's really had a dramatic effect, anti-carcinogenic impact, anti-inflammatory impact. And so as much as you can, try to include mushrooms. They're challenging to learn how, for most people, to learn how to incorporate in mass. And what I mean by that is most people like mushrooms and they eat them about twice a year. But if you can learn how to prepare them in soups and stir fries, learn how to bake them, they're pretty delicious, and they're really super nutritious. So shiitake mushrooms, even white button mushrooms, really, really interesting, nutrient-dense foods for sure. Henry, include them in your diet. We have a question sent in from listener Nisa this week. Nisa asks, what's the best way to increase flexibility? That's a complicated question, but generally speaking, if you're working on flexibility or mobility specifically, let's imagine you have tight hamstrings, let's imagine you have tight hips, or you have a locked up spine or shoulders. These are the really common areas that people tend to complain about. One of the best ways to work on those areas, there's different ways, but one of the best ways is with targeted mobility training. We call it gravity yoga, and it's long hold passive stretches. So we hold poses for 2 to 5 minutes, completely relaxed, or better said, as relaxed as possible. We use a specific breathing technique, in through your nose for 4, out through your mouth for 8. And then we meet or beat our hold times using a stopwatch. This is, in essence, what gravity yoga is all about. We teach gravity yoga in our studios. We teach it online. We have an at-home program. We even have a gravity yoga training program. So if you're interested to learn more, you can poke around our YouTube channel and find some tutorials. And you might consider one of our courses or our programs. Or if you're in Barcelona, come stop by and take a class. But to answer your question directly, Nisa, long hold passive poses, and you want to hold them for 2 to 5 minutes. And generally speaking, we do it body part by body part. So it's working systematically through those stiff parts of your body.
This week's iTunes review is by Judy Joy from USA. Judy Joy says, I'm thrilled to have found this podcast. I'm practically binge listening to the catalog of prior episodes because I can't get enough. Amazing variety of topics and guests focused on whole body wellness. Definitely a must listen. Great website as well. Thank you, Judy Joy. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we will get it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month, yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.